Hello, everybody. Good day. Thank you for joining me. I hope you had an excellent day so far, and I really hope you're going to enjoy this session. It's actually my favorite topic to talk about at the moment, because cyber-espionage is the, well, let's say, most interesting thing that we researchers are looking at the moment. So anyway, before we start, I would like to introduce myself. I'm pretty much a narcissistic person, as you can see. So I have like 20 slides about myself. Actually, not 20 slides, but 2 slides. I just wanted to tell you that I joined Kaspersky Lab in 2007. Actually, next month in November, I'll be celebrating 7 years with the company. It's been 7 very exciting years because, as you can see, I'm not a salesperson. You know, I'm not a marketing person. I don't wear suits. I only wear a shirt when I do presentations. When I'm at the office, I'm like short pants, Hawaii shirt, and stuff like that. I've been involved in a lot of research projects, like ranging from honeypots to artificial intelligence and malware analysis, malware databases. And at the moment, I still do that, but I also travel the world to talk to people like you about interesting things, I hope. So I don't want to bore you to death. I'm part of this team that's called the Global Research and Analysis Team, which is basically Kaspersky's team of experts spread out all over the world. As for myself, I'm based in Bucharest, Romania. I was born in Romania, and I'm pretty proud to be a Romanian. And actually, you know, what we do at the office every day might look something like this, you know, just a bunch of guys sitting in front of the computers, not talking with anybody. But what it actually feels like when you're fighting cybercrime, it feels like this. It feels like, you know, fighting a bull inside the corrida arena. Actually, it's a picture of me in Spain. I told you I like to show pictures of myself in the presentations. But anyways, let's get started. And I want to take you through a little story that I've lived myself in the last 7 years. Because what happened in the last 7 years, actually in the last 5 years, totally changed the way that we currently perceive the antivirus industry. And I was there to see it with my own eyes. Basically, if we go back into the past for, let's say, 20 years ago, in 1994. 1994 was a year in which we can barely say that one new virus would appear every hour. So researchers like myself would have to analyze about 20 new viruses per day. That was the volume, you know, in 1994. If we fast forward to 2006, we moved from one new virus every hour to one new virus every minute. Fast forward again to 2012, we moved from one new virus every minute to one new virus every second, which basically means that Kaspersky Lab has analyzed around 100,000 viruses per day. Now, I'm saying viruses, but what I actually mean here is, you know, viruses, trojans, worms, spyware, all sorts of bad software that we don't want to have on our computers. What about 2014, you might ask? Well, in 2014, we're currently analyzing a little bit more than 300,000 samples of malware per day. And this is like unique malware, unique samples, different ones. So in 1994, we would be able to do this like manually. You would manually look at every virus sample and analyze it. Right now, of course, this is not possible. You cannot scale a virus lab to such a size in which you analyze 300,000 samples per day. So what people like me do nowadays is like we write automatic detection algorithms, you know, scripts and programs that would analyze the malware automatically, analyze the samples automatically, extrapolate the results, write the signatures, send the update to the users, etc. So if everything is happening automatically, you might ask yourself, what are people like me doing in antivirus companies? And the answer is pretty simple. Out of these 300,000 new samples per day, some days, not every day, maybe one sample is truly interesting. Maybe one sample is something that belongs to, you know, cyber-espionage operation. Because the rough reality is that most of the malware is still cybercrime. It's cyber criminals which are writing viruses to try to get their hands on our money. So this is not a presentation about cyber criminals. It's a presentation about cyber warfare. It's a presentation about cyber-espionage and cyber-sabotage. And these are the most interesting things that we see right now. And these are the let's say, research projects from which we get to learn so much. And I'm going to tell you some stories about things that we've encountered in the past years. Actually, you know, if you try to compare cybercrime with cyber warfare, it's very simple to see why we reached this point. For many, many years, cyber criminals have been using malware to try to steal our money, to try to make a profit. And what were governments doing? They were watching the cyber criminals, right? At times they were trying to catch the cyber criminals because actually, they're thieves. But at one point, something happened. Governments realized that they can use the same tools, the same malware that cyber criminals use to steal money, but for a totally different purpose. Because governments are not like eager for money. They have quite big budgets, so they can spend money as long as they spend that money to follow their own interests, to follow their own strategies, their own, let's say, political goals. So we now live in a world in which governments are definitely doing this. And let me show you how it started. It all started in 2009. 2009 was the year in which Google made all the details about Operation Aurora public. Operation Aurora was an operation believed to be originating from China, a cyber-espionage operation, and Google was hit so hard by this operation that this was the reason why they decided to shut down their business operation in China and to quit, to stop doing business in the country. Actually, Google was not the only company hit. Many Fortune 500 companies were hit by this Aurora attack. But back in 2009, 5 years ago, if you tell people that governments are writing malware, they still wouldn't believe you. And would say you're paranoid. And actually, if you would ask any security researcher, what are you guys protecting? What is the thing that your software, your security software is protecting? You know what we would say? We would say that what we are protecting looks something like this. Computers belonging to random users that maybe they don't know what to click on, they don't know what to download, they don't know what to open, and somebody needs to protect them. But then something happened in 2010. Something happened that changed the whole game. In 2010, we realized that what we might be protecting looks more like this, like critical infrastructure. And this whole change happened because of one incident, which is the Stuxnet incident. How many of you have heard of Stuxnet? You can raise your hands. Okay, that's perfect. I was expecting more people. I would just say maybe you're lazy to raise your hands after having lunch. But yeah, Stuxnet was the first example of a cyber weapon. It is widely believed that it was used to target the uranium enrichment facility at Natanz in Iran. And actually, Stuxnet was the first piece of malware that we call cyber weapon. Why do we call it a cyber weapon? Well, first of all, we call it a cyber weapon because there was a huge amount of money being invested in it. We estimate the investment size that was required to build Stuxnet between $10 and $100 million. And we call it a cyber weapon because you can basically describe Stuxnet in a way which truly resembles a missile. A missile has basically two components. It has the warhead, the major payload, and it has the distribution mechanism, right? The thing that makes the rocket go from point A to point B. This is exactly what Stuxnet was doing. It had 4 zero-day vulnerabilities that allowed it to spread to more than 100,000 computers around the world in order to reach that specific computer which was responsible for spinning the centrifuges for the uranium enrichment process. When it got to that specific computer, the main payload activated itself. That was the sabotage module. So this is why we're saying that Stuxnet is a classic example of a cyber weapon. It actually is the first example of something like this ever discovered. It was discovered by a small Belarusian company called Virus Blockada. But afterwards, after they discovered it, all researchers jumped in and tried to reverse it, tried to analyze it, tried to learn more about it. So this was happening in 2010. If we go 1 year further, 2011 was the year in which Duqu was discovered. Now, Duqu was a piece of malware that was very stealthy, very elusive. It was discovered by Mr. Boldizar from the Crisis Lab, the Laboratory for Cryptography and Information Security at the Budapest University. And, Duqu was a piece of malware that was not designed for sabotage. It was designed for espionage. And we believe that information that was stolen by Duqu was later used to make sure that the Stuxnet project was successful. Now, 2012 was the year that became even more interesting. Somewhere in April 2012, news reports starting showing up that computers in the Middle East are starting to get their hard drives wiped by a mysterious piece of malware, which researchers dubbed the wiper, because it was wiping hard drives, of course. So what we did, what every other researchers did, we tried to find this mysterious wiper malware that is all of a sudden deleting hard drives in the Middle East. And guess what? We couldn't find it. Nobody ever found it. So it was just some news reports. We don't even know if it was true or not. But what we managed to find while we were looking for this wiper thing was something completely different, and actually something which was much more interesting than wiper. What we managed to discover was something called Flame. Flame was discovered by Kaspersky Lab in 2012. It was a very complex, highly modular cyber-espionage toolkit. I'm not going to get into any details about the modules that it has, but just for you to grasp an idea of how sophisticated the attackers behind Flame were, I'm just going to tell you the method that Flame was using to distribute itself from one computer to another inside the local network, lateral movement, basically. So Flame was able to do this by actually launching a man-in-the-middle attack against Windows Update. So it was able to distribute itself from one computer to another by disguising itself as a Windows Update. How is that possible? And I actually remember in 2012, before we discovered Flame, I was in Germany at this press conference, and after the press conference, one of the journalists asks me, so Stefan, why is updating so important? Like, I was trying to tell them why updating is so important, why you need to update all of your applications, starting on browser, extensions, all sorts of software, and ending up with your operating system. And this journalist asks me a very interesting question, coming from a journalist. I think it was the most interesting question that I've ever got. He told me, so Stefan, do you think a virus could infect your computer through an update, like through a Windows update? And I laughed at it and I told him, man, I don't really think that's possible. Like, that would never be possible. Every update that gets installed into your computer by your operating system needs to be digitally signed by Microsoft, right? With their private signing keys, their private cryptographic keys. So in order for a virus to infect your computer through the updating mechanism, those people need to steal those private cryptographic keys from Microsoft and then use them to sign their own code so that it would run on the system. So it was an obvious answer. And a few months later, we discovered Flame, and we were, mesmerized. It was something truly amazing. How did these people manage to find a man-in-the-middle vulnerability in Windows Update? So what they managed to do was they didn't get to steal the keys from Microsoft, but what they did is they managed to create a piece of malware that had the same cryptographic hash as a Windows Update, like the same MD5 signature. For those of you that might be a little bit passionate about cryptography, I've actually talked to some cryptography experts around the world. I'm not a cryptography expert myself. And they tell me that the number of people, the number of cryptographers that are able to successfully pull off an attack as this one is probably in the range of 20 to 30. So there's probably 20, 30 people around the world that have the necessary knowledge to pull off such an attack, provided they have enough resources, enough computing power to brute force those MD5 hashes until they find a collision. So this was pretty amazing. It was truly amazing. This is why I told you that these are the most sophisticated things that we get to see, and these are the things from which we get to learn so much by analyzing them. So Flame was discovered at the same time by both Kaspersky and the Crisis Lab in Budapest. We then shared our research together and published it at the same time. Later in the same year, we managed to find something even more interesting. Just one more thing about Flame. Again, it was heavily targeted at the Middle East. So most of the infections in Iran, Israel, and Palestinian territories. And if you look at the number of infections, like 100 computers infected, like 98 computers or 32, like the total is probably around 350. You say, why is this so important? And you can realize why these victims are so important when you look at how much money was invested in these operations. Like if they managed to make Stuxnet with like tens of millions of dollars, Flame with such a man-in-the-middle attack against Windows updates, again, I would say more than $10 million. So who spends $10 million to infect 300 people? It means that those 300 people are very, very important, or very relevant, or very, let's say, they hold information which is very critical. Anyway, Later in 2012, Kaspersky Lab discovered Gauss. Now, we named it Gauss because many of the modules inside the malware were bearing names of famous mathematicians, like Gauss, like Lagrange, like Gödel. It was the same with Flame. We named it Flame because we managed to find some strings inside the malware that were referring to Flame. So we believe that the attackers were using the same name for their internal procedures. The same thing was with Gauss. Names presumably belonging to famous mathematicians. The main payload of Gauss was an encrypted module which would only decrypt itself once it reached a very specific target. It was able to do that by using some strings found in the system to decrypt itself. So if you don't have access to their main target, if you don't have access to the main system, you don't know what the main module is doing. They actually learned from their past mistakes. With Stuxnet, it infected more than 100,000 computers, but the main sabotage module was not encrypted. So everybody could reverse engineer it, and everybody could see that it was actually targeting those PLCs controlling the centrifuges. With Gauss, they learned from their past mistakes, and they encrypted this main payload in such a way that only on the victim computer it would be decrypted. So we tried to decrypt it. We were never able to decrypt it. Now, what we managed to understand about Gauss was that, first of all, it also targeted the Middle East region. You can see most of the infections in Lebanon, but also in Israel and Palestinian territories. Again, thousands of users, but not like millions, not like hundreds of thousands. And a very interesting thing about Gauss, it was that we discovered it had an online banking Trojan module inside it. At first, we got really excited. We said, maybe this is a cyber-espionage operation that finances itself by stealing money from the victims, right? How cool is that? But actually what we understood later was that they were most likely not stealing that money, but they were using the online banking Trojan module to just monitor transactions happening in the Middle East. And now, I'm not sure how familiar you are with, for example, terrorist organizations, but Lebanon, as far as I know, is the country from which Hamas originates. So I can totally understand the logic behind it. I can totally understand why some governments out there might want to use malware to monitor financial transactions inside a country which finances terrorist organizations. So it kind of makes sense. Now, this is the last part about the Stuxnet, Duqu, Flame, and Gauss story. I like to talk about all of them in the same place because, at the same time, because all of them are related. And the reason why we are sure that all of them are related is that if you actually analyze the code, you can see that all of these four malwares share some code, share some modules. For example, both Stuxnet and Duqu were built on the same platform. We call it the tilted platform. Both Flame and Gauss were built on another platform, but again, the same platform for both of them. We call it the Flame platform. And all of them, they share like different modules, like the USB infection module or the auto-run module is being shared between the 2010 version of Stuxnet and both Flame and Gauss. So I'm not saying that exactly the same people worked on them, but at one point, in their organizational structure, there was some cooperation because you cannot use the exact same module without having access to the source code. Now, we're getting closer to the present day. We're moving to 2013. And 2013 was a year that started very strongly. In January, Kaspersky Lab published a huge report about a piece of malware, actually not a piece of malware, about a cyber-espionage operation which we called Red October. The reason why we called it Red October was that the whole story started in October 2012 when we received an image of an infected computer from one of our customers inside the European Union. He was saying there must be something suspicious in there. We took the image, we analyzed it, and 3 months later, almost 4 months later, in the beginning of 2013, we published a huge report about Red October. What was amazing about this report, it actually included a map like this, but not the map. The map was not amazing. It was the first time that we made a map like this with some nice graphic designers. What's interesting about Red October is that, first of all, it's an operation that's not targeted at a very specific region, like the Middle East was, for example, with all the others. It's a more worldwide reaching operation. It mostly targets like governmental institutions, diplomatic institutions, like embassies. So, for example, the one victim that we have here in Latvia, not really sure how the laser works. The one victim that we have here in Latvia is actually an embassy, right? So it's not an actual Latvian victim, but an embassy of a foreign country that was located here in Latvia. I'm really sorry. We're in Estonia right now. Yesterday I was in Latvia, so really sorry about this. Yeah.
We are clean. We are clean.
Estonia is clean, that's true, that's true. But again, really sorry about that. Worldwide reaching operation. And I want to show you some interesting things about Red October, because Red October was a cyber-espionage operation that was targeting victims mostly by spear phishing emails. These are some names that were used by the attackers inside the attachments. This is how one of these exploit-rigged attachments looked like. For example, diplomatic car for sale. This was used against a victim in India. So every time they try to, they do their reconnaissance, they do their homework, and they will always attack you with a message that is very useful to what you're interested in at that point. Just increase the chances of you opening up that email. So after opening up the email, the exploit fires up, it infects your computer, and then again, this is a very modular cyber-espionage kit. The attackers are basically able to directly send what modules they need and what modules they want to every specific victim. We managed to uncover more than 1,000 unique files, unique modules. Basically, we believe that they actually compile each module and make it dedicated for each victim. We managed to divide them in 34 types, around 9 categories, 9 groups, like for initial infection, for lateral movement, for data exfiltration, etc., etc. I'm not going to take you through all of them, of course, but I'm going to take you through 2 of them, which I think are the most interesting ones. So this is a module, it's called USB Stealer, because probably in the beginning it was used to steal files from USB sticks, but actually it doesn't only steal files from USB sticks, it steals files from any kind of device that you plug in or you already have in your computer, any kind of storage device. And what's interesting is some of the file types that they are targeting. Like, they're not targeting necessarily emails, not only emails or not only documents. They were targeting another file type called ACID. It's a file type used by an application called ACID Cryptofiller. How many of you have heard of it? Nobody? How many of you haven't heard of it? I haven't heard of it either before analyzing Red October. But what ACID Cryptofiller is, basically, if you Google it, it's an encryption software that was developed by the French government, and at this moment is heavily being used inside NATO, inside the NATO organization. Another file type that was targeted by the Red October attackers is XIS. It's files used by a software called Chiasmus. Now again, have you heard of Chiasmus? I haven't heard of Chiasmus either. Chiasmus, if you Google it, is an encryption software that was developed by the German government, by the BSI. And it's actually heavily being used to encrypt communications inside European Union structures. So you can clearly see how these attackers, they have an interest in getting their heads on data which is supposed to be encrypted. They're actually stealing the private keys that are used to encrypt that data. And I think it's a very interesting thing to keep in mind, and I'm going to tell you why at the end of the presentation. The other interesting module that Red October was using is a module called Zakladka. Now, I don't speak Russian, but I have lots of colleagues who speak Russian. As far as I understand right now, Zakladka basically means bookmark. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But during the Cold War times, Zakladka was a term that was used by spies to designate those microphones that would be hidden inside the wall of an embassy or inside the wall of a hotel room in order to listen to the conversations that were happening in the room. Red October was using this Zakladka DLL module. Again, it's the name that the attackers gave. We like to use their names if we manage to find them inside the malware. It's the name that the attackers gave to this module that would be injected inside the Windows mobile phone when the Windows mobile phone was connected through a cable to a computer that was already infected by Red October. And it would enable the attackers to remotely activate the microphone of the phone. So basically to remotely listen into conversations that were happening in the same room where the phone was located. So, again, like 5 years ago, if you would meet a friend of yours and he would tell you, hey man, we need to discuss some very critical issues, please put your phone into a different room. You would say that, he's paranoid. He's like, there's nothing like that. How can somebody listen to what you're talking in real life through a phone? And this is how they can do it, with malware. It's so simple. It's sad, but it's true. So that's the story with Red October, targeting embassies, targeting their encryption, targeting their phones to listen up to conversations that are happening inside the room. Pretty sophisticated and pretty advanced stuff. It feels like you're in a thriller movie. Another operation that I wanted to talk to you about is called NetTraveler. Again, we called it NetTraveler because that's how the attackers refer to it, as NetTraveler. We call it the red star of espionage because the file icon actually had the red star. Now again, it's a worldwide reaching operation. We believe that it might have origins in China, but you know, attribution when it comes to cyber attacks is a very tricky game to play. But what's interesting about NetTraveler is that it's targeted, by using much less resources than the other attackers, like we estimate the investment size required for the NetTraveler operation to be less than $500,000, they managed to run a successful cyber espionage operation worldwide, affecting industries, very critical industries, such as nanotech, laser, drilling, airspace, and so on. Which shows, I think it shows an evolution. It shows that these attacks are much easier to make by, with every day that passes. And the last example of cyber espionage operation that I want to talk to you about, and this is the last one, again, discovered by Kaspersky. It's called IceFog. It was discovered last year. And why IceFog is important is that it showed us a totally different approach to APT, a totally different approach to cyber espionage. Now, when we say APT, we mean advanced persistent threat, right? What does that mean? It means that the attacker is advanced enough to penetrate your network, and then it wants to persist inside the network for as long as possible, for years and years, in order to, take out information from your computers. Now, IceFog takes a totally different approach. They do operations in a hit-and-run style. This is why we call them cyber mercenaries. Because usually before they attack a network, they know exactly what they want. So they go in, they get the information, and they get out. And this usually happens in like 2 weeks. So if you don't manage to catch them in those 2 weeks time frame, you're probably never going to catch them again. You don't even know what hit you. And what we believe is that these people are like private cyber espionage, a private cyber espionage group. They target, again, interesting sectors like military, like shipbuilding, like telecom or satellite communications. But because of the fact that they usually target like private information, not necessarily governmental institutions, we believe that the way it works is something like this, like two businessmen, they meet at some exhibition overseas, they talk about some projects, they exchange business cards, and then one of the businessmen goes back home, he knows the IceFog gang, he's like, hey, I met this guy from this competitor of mine, they were saying they're working on some interesting projects related to, I don't know, airspace drilling or drilling on the moon or whatever. So this guy gives the attackers the business card of the other guy, and then the attackers move in, they get the information, they move out, and everything is happening very quickly. It's an operation that was mostly targeted in South Korea and Japan. That was where the most of the victims were. And again, if you look at how sophisticated it is, it's not very sophisticated. Like, they're not using zero-day exploits, Stuxnet was using 4 zero-day exploits in order to distribute itself. Like, just to give you an idea of the scale, most of the malware is not even using exploits. It's still using social engineering. Then if you find a piece of malware that is using an exploit, let's say an old exploit, that's already a pretty advanced piece of malware. And then if it's a new exploit, if it's a 0-day, then it's incredible. Then it's something that happens, a few times per year. Stuxnet was using 4 zero-day exploits. We never managed to find something like that. Nobody, ever. But again, it shows that, with a very small investment, like tens of thousands of dollars, you can successfully attack victims which have websites that look like this. So again, like really, critical, high-tech things. Now, why am I telling you all these stories? I don't want to bore you to death. I actually have a logical conclusion here. What I want you to remember is that every year that passes, and when I say we, I don't only mean Kaspersky, but I mean the whole research community around the world, both private and academic, we are discovering more and more cyber espionage operations than ever before. Like it was Stuxnet in 2010, Duqu in 2011, and since 2012, and these are just the ones discovered by Kaspersky, and 2014 has been an even busier year, and I'm not even including the ones that are discovered by other researchers. I want you to see a trend here. I want you to see a trend which is a trend that's very clear right now, is that all governments around the world, if they don't already have offensive cyber operations, I'm sure they are thinking of launching some. So what I'm thinking is that most of the countries are already doing it, and the countries that are not doing it, they're thinking of doing it. Like this is a news report about the Swedish armed forces which want to attack other countries' computers network if they need to. So I'm guessing like every country right now wants to do something like this. So the trends are quite simple. The cost of APTs is decreasing. We're seeing operations which are made with like tens of thousands of dollars that are successfully targeting interesting industries. We're seeing the emergence of cyber mercenaries and dedicated private espionage. We're seeing larger operations, like operations that are worldwide reaching, but that still manage to maintain that surgical precision in targeting the victims, so they're not just infecting random people everywhere, they infect exactly who needs to be infected. And I think that we're going to see more like cyber-sabotage type of tools, like the wiper story that I was telling you earlier. Now, for the last part of the presentation, I want to leave you with some food for thought. 3 reasons why we believe that cyber war is a dangerous thing. The first one is what we call the boomerang effect. It's the main difference between a cyber weapon and a real-life weapon. With a real-life missile, it's not like you can catch the missile, you can turn it around and launch it at the country that first attacked you. With cyber weapons, it's very easy to do so. I'm going to show you like an example for each of these. The second reason is that, we're seeing companies and regular users becoming collateral victims in this war between superpowers. And last but not least, we're starting to see cyber criminals getting inspired by the developments of APT operations, of cyber-espionage. So let me give you examples for each of these. Saudi Aramco is the national oil company in Saudi Arabia. At one point in 2011, they were hit, in 2012, they were hit by a piece of malware called Shamoon, which all of a sudden wiped 30,000 hard drives inside their company. Now, how would you feel if this would happen to your company? Like one day you get to the office and you see that like 30,000 computers are totally wiped. So this is an idea that was copied from the wiper malware that was reported about in the Middle East. And again, it was copied again later in the same year in South Korea, when all of a sudden during one day, hard drives belonging to banks and TV stations were wiped again by a piece of malware. So you can see how easy it is to get an idea, to reverse engineer it, and to, turn it around and launch it back. It's the boomerang effect, and it's something that happens when you engage in cyber war. I told you that companies and users like you and me are becoming collateral victims of this war between superpowers. This is the second reason why cyber war is dangerous. And we have to understand that, we are used to live in a world in which we take some things for granted. Things like online banking, doing voice over IP conference calls, sending emails. Like we rely on technology to take our businesses, to manage our businesses day to day. And what actually happens when the gods are fighting over the internet is innocent people are becoming victims. Chevron, for example, 2 years after Stuxnet was discovered, they publicly admitted that they were also hit by Stuxnet. And I'm sure they are not the only company that was hit by Stuxnet. And what I'm saying here is that, when you make a worm that infects 100,000 computers around the world in order to reach to one specific computer, all of those 100,000 computers are basically collateral victims. They're not targets, they're just pivot points. You use them to reach to your final destination. Now, the thing is, Stuxnet was a piece of malware that was very professionally designed. It was designed by true professionals, so nothing bad happened to those 100,000 computers that were infected. But you can easily think of a scenario in which a piece of malware just like Stuxnet would be developed by some people who are not as professional, not as well paid, not as well educated as the developers of Stuxnet. And the idea is that all of our critical infrastructure is being run by computers. Like in this morning, when you arrived at the conference and you pressed the button at the elevator to call the elevator, who decided which of those 4 elevators will take you to the 6th floor? And the answer is very simple. A computer made this decision. And most of the times, these computers are unfortunately not protected. So it's a very dangerous thing to have collateral victims in cyber war. Last point, the commercialization of exploits. and the link between cybercrime and cyber war. These are some statistics from our in the cloud security network, the Kaspersky security network, which help us provide instant protection to all of our users, and also it helps us get statistics about what bad stuff gets detected on around the world. And actually what happened in December 2012 was all of a sudden we noticed a spike in the detections of CVE 2011-3402. And this CVE is actually the CVE that belongs to the Duqu vulnerability. So the vulnerability that was used by Duqu, the 0-day that was discovered with Duqu. So what happened here, like 1.5 years after Duqu was discovered, some cyber criminals took a look at that vulnerability and managed to engineer an exploit that would use that vulnerability to infect computers. So we see here how the results of research and development that was made by governments for creating cyber weapons was used 1 year later by cyber criminals to get some profits. So, you know, we all work in IT, we all live inside companies that have to use software, which unfortunately is full of vulnerabilities. That's the sad reality that we have to live in. And, you know, software is being made by humans. The human mind tends to make mistakes. So we just have to admit that this is something that is not going to go away. Another thing that we have to realize is that the threats that companies are facing at the moment are not that simple. It's not just about cybercrime anymore. It's also about hacktivists that will try to attack you just to send a message, just to prove a point. It's also about you know, corporate espionage, private espionage, and it's also about governmental, like nation-state sponsored attacks that we have to defend against. And the thing is, you know, it's very hard to defend against these attackers. That's what we have to admit. No, anybody that would say they would offer you 100% protection, they are liars. But what we can do is, you know, we can use the technologies that we have to at least make these attacks more expensive, to at least make these attackers spend more money in attacking us, so that at one point we can reach a point in which they would say, maybe it's just not worth it, you know, maybe it's just not worth to spend 10 million to attack, you know, this guy. Maybe it's not worth it. But what I need you to remember after this presentation is that, you know, in the past year, the things that were revealed by, for example, Edward Snowden and the other things that we managed to find out through other leaks, is that every government in the world is definitely, you know, tapping our communications, and they're trying to get their hands on as much information as possible. And what I'm happy about is that in the past year, secure encryption tools for communications were being developed. For example, now I have like 3 applications on my phone that allow me to like securely communicate with my friends, either through text, either through voice, and I'm pretty happy about that. I'm pretty happy that I don't use Skype anymore. I'm pretty happy that I don't send SMS messages anymore. But what this means is that governments will, attackers generally, will try to go to the only place where data is not encrypted. And the only place where data is not encrypted, if we manage to encrypt all of our communications, is here. It's on the endpoint. It's where you type it on the keyboard. It's when you see it on the screen. So I think that people like me, people like us who are involved in the security industry are going to have some very interesting years following, because as encryption becomes ubiquitous and everybody starts using encryption, the only way these attackers will get their hands on our data is by attacking our computers, and we will be there to catch them. Just 3 conclusions for the end, and you get rid of me. You can go to the coffee break and discuss. First of all, malware is definitely going to continue to grow. As long as cyber criminals will be able to make profits, they will keep developing it. Second of all, it's not about Windows. It's not just about Windows malware anymore. We're seeing attacks targeting Android mobile phones, Windows mobile phones, and even more importantly, Mac OS X operating system. So just because you're not using Windows, it doesn't mean that you are necessarily safe. And when you talk about cyber-espionage and advanced attacks, it gets even more interesting because they basically have exploits for every type of operating system. They must have them. It's you know, what they do. And last but not least, we have to get used with the idea that cyber-espionage and cyber-sabotage are a common thing. Like everybody's doing it. You know, it's like commercials for detergents, for washing your clothes. It's like if a company stops doing it, they will just lose market share. So everybody has to do it. It's the same commercials. You see them every year. They're very boring. But if they don't do it, they will lose. So it's the same thing in this cyber-espionage game that governments are playing. The ones that are not doing it are going to lose. So I'm guessing that if not everybody is already doing it, in a few years from now, everybody will be doing it. So We live in very interesting times, and we are here to, to save the world. This is what we like to say at Kaspersky's Global Research and Analysis team. So, thank you very much for paying attention, and if there's any... Thank you. And if you have any questions or would like to discuss anything, you can find me by the booth till the end of the day. It would be my pleasure. Do we have time for questions? Does anyone have any question? There's one right here. I will repeat it. You can. Okay.
What kind of information this espionage malware collects? Do you know anything specific? And the second one, did you manage to, let's say, find the data center where it goes to?
Very good questions. So first of all, what kind of information these cyber-espionage operations collect? Well, they basically collect information which is not meant to be public, which is not meant to be collected. They like to go to places, there's usually critical things. If an embassy is attacked, you can imagine what kind of documents circulate around an embassy. If a governmental institution is attacked, it's again, things that can help, keep the national security of a country where it should be. So it's usually very, very critical things. For your second question, it's actually, I like the second question much more. If we manage to find the command and control servers, if I get it right, where does this information usually go to? And actually, I didn't mention it in the presentation, but as researchers, the most interesting things that we find about cyber-espionage is by analyzing command and control servers. Now, because there's no difference between a cyber-espionage attacker and a cyber-criminal. They have to use some servers which are rented in some other people's name. They will not put their own name in there. So, we have partnerships with hosting providers around the world. So if we manage to find a server that is hosted at a common data center, at a big data center that we have a relationship with, we can go there and maybe we can get a copy of that image. And when you get a copy of the image of the command and control server, you get to see some very interesting insights into how these cyber-espionage operations are organized from behind. And actually, if you manage to close the command and control server, they will have to shut down their operation, which is something which is usually happening after we publish our reports. Like after we published the Red October report, in the same week, the whole operation was shut down. Because these people, they like to operate in the dark. They don't want to be known. They don't want to be seen. So the moment when they get discovered, they have to shut down everything. The sad part is that I'm sure for each cyber-espionage operation that we uncover, there's at least 10 others which are continuing to operate without any problem. All right. Thank you very much for questions, and see you around.